Chapter 13. Non quos sed quis. Webb rematerialized in a sleek-walled cylinder not 2 meters wide. She looked up to see a hatch screw shut. Oh, shit. It went instantly, blisteringly cold. Hyperfreon gel seeped up from a grate at her feet. Webb dropped the spray pack and hopped atop it. She set her queller to max. Aimed at the hatch with numbing hands, she fired. Her beam cut through the ice forming there and blasted open the hatch. The gel was already freezing, cementing her spray pack in ice. She leapt for the opening, caught its ledge with fingers she couldn't feel. She pulled herself up as the gel swallowed her pack. She rolled to the side and slammed the hatch shut. An alarm was blaring, painting the dark domed room and its series of hatches the color of blood. "Alert!" warned Indy. "Cryostasis breach. Alert!" A puff of hyperfreon escaped the hatch as the last of the gel hardened, entombing her spray pack below. A new alarm, higher pitched. "Alert! Fugitive in oubliette is armed." She shot the alarm. It gurgled and died. Its lights died with it. Webb kicked herself. Of course the officers' lounge was teep-shielded. They couldn't have crew teleporting in. The room was designed to withstand a mutiny, so they'd set the ship to redirect any teleportation signals here. The meat locker, the cryostasis vault at the lowest deck of the ship, where crew deemed irreformable were housed. Webb rubbed the feeling back into her limbs. She'd never seen the meat locker before. Few crew had. Most folks who visited never left, and judging by the readouts on the sealed hatches on the floor, most of the oubliettes were occupied. The meat locker lay beneath the terminus of the ship's central lift shaft. Webb checked the locker's security console, called up the camera feeds for the shaft above the dome. Only a single camera was still functioning, and it was knocked off its axis, but it could still see the ripples of light shimmering off reflective carapaces several decks up. So the lift shaft was out. She couldn't teep out either. The room didn't have its own teleporter, and any signatures originating within the meat locker room would be bounced down into an oubliette. She didn't have a spray pack to use as a step stool this time. She sank to the floor. Her chest felt heavy and hollow. She had no food, no exit, no way of defending herself if the Xenos came down. It was hard to tell herself not to just stay put. The room had life support, and if things turned alert, she could crawl into an oubliette and let herself be frozen. Might as well. She sighed, glanced up at the dome. There were no maintenance tunnels that reached this low, no conduits she could crawl through. She was stuck at the very bottom of the ship, armed with only a queller with a fading charge. Her own abyssal purgatory, with no way out. Except, no, that wasn't entirely true. The ship's schematics rose in her mind. In case Command needed to dump its cargo of frozen prisoners, the meat locker shared an ejection shaft with the Star Drive's emergency failsafe system. Worth checking out. She slipped through the room's single-service hatch, climbed down a rickety ladder into its ejection chute. She used the last of the queller's charge to cut through the partition separating the chutes. After its edges cooled, she crawled through the gap. Webb looked up the Star Drive's emergency ejection shaft. Its walls were sheer and ladderless. This was a system that required no maintenance and offered no handholds. More than a dozen decks up lay engineering. The only things to grip were the tracks of the failsafe's ejection pod, safety rails that ran the length of the shaft to keep the Star Drive from hitting the walls on its way out. Rails only slightly wider than a pipe. 15 decks up lay engineering. Webb took hold of the nearest track. She hoped it would hold. From the panoramic views of the captain's cabin, his cabin, though he would never have the chance to enjoy it, Blackwell gazed down upon Acheron 117. His jaw ached at the unfairness of it all, as if he'd meant to gain his command by attrition. Battlefield commissions always carried an air of inauthenticity, a lingering question of merit. And as for those commissions that had been reversed, captains who'd been replaced after a crisis by men with the proper pedigree, Blackwell couldn't think of a single one who'd earned a captaincy again. He sighed, no feeling sorry for himself, Leave that for the crew who'd never put in the effort to improve their station. As for him, he would suffer in silence, as was expected of an officer, of a captain. And while he still held that rank, he had duties to perform. Independence, open a channel to Fleet Admiral Self. The computer chimed. The Admiral's face replaced the planet on his view screen. Admiral! His salute was crisp. I have an update for you. It can wait. Have you located the ambassador? I have every confidence she will be apprehended. The Admiral frowned. So, no. Not yet. Have you at least finished scouring the planet? That has been delayed. He exhaled sharply. I gave you explicit directions, Captain. Hearing the rank stung. It wasn't on my orders, sir. On whose, if not yours? Commander Sivos, head of security. He rode out to the massacre on the planet and jumped an emergency teepsig back to the ship. The Admiral consulted something out of view. Sivos? Is the Mustang? Yes. Blackwell couldn't keep his lip from curling. The crew practically worships him. The Admiral crossed his arms with a grunt. He'll be assuming the captaincy shortly, said Blackwell. I would like it noted in the record that I handed over command without complaint. One moment. The Admiral vanished. Blackwell let out a sigh, paced a small circle. On the planet, clouds of dust from the orbital bombardment obscured the surface. He thought about rerouting weapons controls to the cabin and blasting the planet a few more times, but that would just be petulant. The Admiral reappeared in a new location, one so dark Blackwell couldn't tell where he was. Is this line secure? Blackwell nodded. It is? Where have you transferred the command codes yet? I have not. Good. Don't. Blackwell's stomach fluttered. Sir? Do not transfer the command codes. It is the judgment of the Admiralty that Sivos exhibits attitudes and behavior unsuited for deep space command. I understand he was absent when the Xenos attacked the ship. For a security chief, that's a severe dereliction of duty. Blackwell shifted his feet. He wasn't even on the ship at the time. The Admiral looked at him like he was an idiot. Do you want a command or not? Blackwell flushed. It's all I've ever wanted. And you do realize, considering the mortality rate of your bridge, that this is the last command you'll ever get. That's not my fault. The Admiralty won't see it that way. I'm offering you a chance to redeem yourself, Captain. If you're brave enough to fight for it. Complete your mission, you keep the ship. Command requires action, Lieutenant Commander. Now, he leaned forward. Are you going to step up when your party needs you? Or are you going to hide behind the chain of command? Blackwell threw a salute. I will carry out my duty or die in the attempt. Good. Then we're done here. The Admiral reached for his console. But, sir, what shall I tell the crew? He rolled his eyes. You're the captain, Blackwell. You tell them what to believe. Is that so hard? Also, ignore any signals coming from the planet. It's nothing but propaganda. Self, out. The screen blinked off. Blackwell looked down at the planet anew, his heart thumping, his chest swelling with pride. He straightened his cuffs. Independence. Summon the Armstrongs. Her hands cramping, her fingers numb, Webb reclipped her toolband around the ejection track and hung back over the shaft like one of those ancient telecom tower rats, dangling her arms to let the feeling flow back into her hands. It wasn't the fatigue that was exhausting her. She kept in fairly good shape, but the labored whirring of her lungs. It was like breathing through a blanket. She had to stop her climb every deck or two just to catch her breath and wait for the spots at the edge of her vision to fade. Not that she could tell where one deck ended and the other began. The decks weren't indicated in the ejector shaft, and most didn't even have hatches. Crewmen only ever popped in here to dump contraband. Engineering still lay way too many decks above. From her current position, she couldn't even see the iris valve beneath the star drive. She shimmied up another stretch of track, her lungs and hands griping, until she came to a hatch covered in corroded ceramic plating. If her bearings were right, she was staring at the waste chute from the xenobiology lab. Xenobio wasn't far from a lifeboat cluster. Definitely worth a look. She tapped the chute's hatch. It was cold at the touch. Webb eased the hatch open. Out spilled ash and clumps of foul-smelling coal. She climbed up and in, following the chute's upward slope into the lab's incinerator. She crawled over its cold elements and wiped the soot off the tiny inset window. She could barely see in the room beyond. The other side of the window was almost caked to opacity, but she could see enough. The bulkhead beside the door had been torn open like foil-wrapped leftovers. Exam tables lay toppled, instruments scattered about. Her eyes fell upon a legless body in a lab coat. R.I.P., Baron. A dash of movement. Webb ducked out of sight. She heard no chittering, no clicking. She chanced another glimpse through the window. There were Xenos there now, a ring of them, all facing inward and bobbing in unison. She could barely make out a dead Xeno in the center of their circle. Its head and forelimb were missing. Whatever they were doing, xenobiology was a dead end. She gingerly crawled back out into the ejection shaft and closed the garbage hatch behind her. Her only other option lay up at the very top of the ejection shaft, the puckered anus of the star drive. Blackwell paced in the wardroom. His cabin would have offered more privacy, but it could only be accessed from the bridge. Too many people would have noticed them gathering. He couldn't afford to tip his hand. The door slid open. Jacobs let in a couple dozen Armstrongs. Blackwell didn't see the big one. "Where's Loomis?"
"At the Nexus," said Jacobs. "A couple more are still on the bridge. Didn't want to bring everyone at once. We'd have been noticed."
He couldn't argue with that. "I expected you sooner." Jacobs' eyes were flinty.
"Chivos took our pins."
That would make coordination more difficult. All of them?
"No."
Jacobs passed him a handful.
"We stockpiled them when we saw what he was doing."
"Good. You'll need to go deck by deck to spread the word. What's he doing with the pins?"
"Giving them to the soldiers," said Jacobs. "They're using them as backup comms, but they've only got one for every 2 or 3 of them."
Blackwell grunted. "And our soldiers? Do they still have theirs?"
"They're standing by, just waiting to hear from you."
"Excellent." Blackwell pulled himself to his full height. "Gentlemen, I won't mince words. Your ship needs you. I called you here because I know you're willing to do whatever's necessary to protect our ship and way of life. Succeed, and you'll reap the spoils." They nodded, their eyes gleaming. "I've said this before, but it bears repeating. Command requires a willingness to make the hard decisions. We're past the point of platitudes. The time has come to act." He tilted his chin towards the ceiling. "Independence. Open personal epistle, encrypted, priority 1. Address to Captain Sokola of the Liberator." A negative chime. "Crewmen below security clearance detected." "Proceed. I trust them." The ship chimed again. "Recording. This is Acting Captain Blackwell of the Coalition Starship Independence," he began. "We don't have much time. There has been a mutiny on our ship, led by our own security chief. I'm even now leading a counterinsurgency to root out the seditionists. Should his mutiny succeed, Commander Sivos will claim to be in command upon your arrival. Admiral Self of Coalition Command is aware of our situation and has approved our measures. Feel free to check with him to confirm the veracity of my claim. Good luck and Godspeed, Captain. Independence. End message and send." He turned to the Armstrongs, his eyes hard. "Men, we have been betrayed. I have discovered overwhelming evidence that Sivos conspired with the missing Sol ambassador to organize the Xeno attack on our ship." Furious murmurs, mutters of, "I knew it," and "Traitors!" He marched up and down their line. "We have legal orders from the Admiralty to stop this coup in its tracks. Now, are you ready to do what we must? Are you ready to live up to your title as Armstrongs?" Their cheers were deafening. Blackwell ground his eyes shut, tried not to let his annoyance show. "Quiet, you idiots. It's called operational security." He put on a smile and handed out pens. "Go, spread the word, and don't leave altogether. The mutineers are idiots, but even they'd notice a group this big." The Armstrongs were almost bouncing as they left, cracking high fives and bumping fists. "Mr. Jacobs, said Blackwell. He turned. Stay with the men you've handpicked. We have some details to go over. Imagining Indy's petulant whining as she cut her way into the officer's lounge with an engineering torch kept Webb going as she shimmied up the ejection shaft. The shaft narrowed as she neared the drive's ejection cage, which was designed to catch the spat-out drive if disaster struck and kick it a light year away before its star expanded. Webb pulled herself up into the cage towards the ferro-rubber iris valve at the top of the shaft. She hesitated there. If the heat shield above had been breached, she'd only have to endure a few excruciating seconds before her charred remains tumbled back down the shaft, assuming she didn't just caramelize to the cage. Ah, the joys of engineering. She never thought she'd miss slathering herself with burn gel. Webb squirmed up through the folds. Her lack of combustion told her that the heat shield had held. Little victories. She crawled out an adjoining access tube, wriggled under its raised emergency bulkheads, and turned onto her back while her arms bitched about the climb. She lay there, sweating, in the pit, the bulky and stiflingly hot maintenance trough beneath the star drive. Above thrummed the drive, the beating heart of the ship. 3 stories of glass and light. It was comforting to see it again. She rolled over to peer out a vent. No Xenos in view. But she did see the door they'd chopped open, the very door that Cog had nearly dragged her through. She strained her ears, but couldn't hear anything over the rhythmic pulsing of the drive and the soft whirring of her lungs. Maybe the Xenos were still doing whatever the hell down in Xenobio. She climbed up the ladder to the lowest level, hugging the rim of the pit. Engineering was quiet. Quiet and still. She lifted an extinguisher harness out of its cradle by the core, eased out its canisters, and slipped it on. She also grabbed some welding goggles and a torch hanging from the rail. Technician! She bit down a scream and whirled, her legs nearly jellying. Nothing there. Nothing but the dismembered cog near the punched-in door. Its marble head, sliced off right above the clavicle, traversed its eyes to her. I have been damaged, technician, said the head. She felt her chest unclench. Yeah, no shit. Please transport me to the repair bay. Quiet, she hissed. We've been boarded. Technician, it had called her. Must have cued off Seven's badge. Good thing she'd repaired it. Last thing she needed was it trying to detain her again. The bruises on her wrist still ached. Please transport me to the repair bay. Something tickled at her awareness. Say that again? Please transport me to the repair bay. There it was. You said me and I. First person. Affirmative, said the head. I have been severed from the collective operations group. Please transport me to the repair bay. Webb scanned the upper gantries. No movement there. She still felt dangerously exposed. Can't help you. Sorry. You are beyond too heavy. Please transport me to the repair bay. Shut up. She couldn't possibly move its body on her own. But if it kept talking... She briefly considered destroying the head with the engineering torch. As satisfying as that would be, Indy would lose her shit. Technician, please escort me to the repair bay. Dude, I can't even get the doors open. It froze, blinked. Explain. Okay, sure. She pointed at engineering's cargo lift. Indy, open the cargo lift doors. Your permissions have been revoked. The ship almost sounded smug. Webb shrugged. See? Independence, said the head. Open cargo lift doors. The lift's doors whisked open. Webb's jaw dropped. Shit the bunk! Unable to comply. She stared at the severed white head. You've still got permissions. You've still got access. Affirmative. Please transport me to the repair bay. Her mind raced. With the cargo lift, she could bypass engineering's upper levels and shoot straight outside the officer's lounge. Hell, she could take it all the way down to the storage bays. She could restock on agrochems and stop having a heart attack at every shadow. Cog. She wasn't sure how to address it. Can you give me a damage report on the ship? Or tell if the comms are still down? Its eyes twitched. Unable to comply. Why? What's wrong? I have been severed from the collective operations group. She nodded slowly. Right. So you're not talking to the other cogs. You don't have access to the ship's computers. Affirmative. Please transport me to the repair bay. One thing first. She crouched down beside it. Do you recognize me? Who am I? Its eyes spun like a slot machine and locked onto her badge. You are First Technician Mary Chevalier. Are there any warrants out for my arrest? Negative. That'll do. She rose. Thank you, Seven. Please repeat the request. Forget it. She hung the torch from her toolband. The ship has been damaged. I can get you to the repair bay, but we'll need to take a circuitous route. And you'll have to open the doors for me. Copy. Please transport me to the repair bay. I haven't quite figured out how to do that. He was far too heavy to move without a gravjack, and with her lungs damaged, she doubted she could even load him up. His legs were beyond repair, as was his torso. The head, though, other than being decapitated, seemed to be doing fine. She spotted a broken strut sticking out of a guardrail, a strut that would be an easy weld to the frame of her extinguisher harness.